in the sprawling metropolis of Andera Prime, a city where Earth's cultures had blended seamlessly with those of visiting worlds. There was a tucked-away cafe called the Nebula Nook. Its neon sign flickered sporadically, the shape of a shooting star captured mid-flight. Inside, the warm scent of roasted beans mingled with alien spices, creating an inviting atmosphere for travelers from across the galaxy. At one of the mismatched tables, humans and off-worlders alike shared drinks and stories. Here, everyone could relax, free from judgment, a rare haven on a planet still adjusting to its role in the interstellar community. Milan Miles, a 30-something software developer who preferred the simplicity of hoodies and sneakers, had made the Nebula Nook his second home. He liked the low hum of alien conversations, the subtle adaptations in the air that allowed different species to breathe comfortably, and, most importantly, the fact that no one here cared about his project deadlines. This particular afternoon, Milan was midway through a mug of Soulvine brew, a bitter, citrusy drink he'd acquired a taste for, when he noticed her. At first, he thought she was just another tourist. The city saw its fair share of Xerelians, tall and elegant beings with shimmering, opalescent skin. But this woman was different. She wasn't snapping holograms or struggling to decipher Earth menus like most visitors. Instead, she sat near the cafe window, her skin glowing faintly as she scribbled into a sleek notebook. The symbol she wrote looked more like flowing artwork than any written language. When her eyes lifted and met his, Milan felt an unexpected jolt. Xerelian eyes were unsettling at first, pupilless, glowing orbs that shifted colors like mood rings. Hers were a serene blue-green, reminding him of tropical lagoons or the digitally rendered aquariums featured on travel ads. "Take a picture, human," she teased, her voice melodic but laced with humor. "It lasts longer." Milan blinked, realizing he'd been staring. He raised his cup awkwardly. "Sorry," he muttered. "Didn't mean to gawk." "You're forgiven," she said lightly, shutting her notebook and tilting her head as she studied him. Her glowing skin flickered subtly. "Do all humans spend their afternoons brooding over drinks, or is that just you?" "I don't brood," Milan protested, though his tone landed closer to defensive than confident. "I'm thinking about work." It wasn't entirely true. Moments earlier, he'd been debating whether he could afford to upgrade his gaming rig that month. Hardly the introspection of a brooding intellectual. She smirked knowingly. "Work, huh?" Gesturing to his cup, she added, "Bold choice, drinking Soulvine brew. I'd have pegged you for a plain espresso type. I like to live dangerously," he quipped, surprising himself. The woman laughed, a soft, melodic sound like wind chimes swaying in the breeze. "Well, dangerous human," she said, offering her hand. "I'm Josie." "And you are?" "Milan," he replied, shaking her hand. "Just Milan. No fancy interstellar titles or glowing skin. I'm afraid." Her smile widened, revealing teeth that were just a little sharper than human ones. "Nice to meet you, just Milan." Their conversation flowed easily after that. Josie explained that she was an anthropologist, or the Xerelian equivalent, studying Earth's cultures during her extended stay. She found humans endlessly fascinating. Their chaotic routines, their primitive but charming technology, and their ability to create beauty out of disarray. "In your cafes," she mused, gesturing around them. "On my world, communal spaces are purely functional. You enter, acquire what you need, and leave. But here, you linger. You talk. You share. Sometimes we just stare," Milan teased. Josie chuckled. "True. But it's endearing." The afternoon might have ended as just another pleasant chat between a human and an alien, but fate, or rather Milan's clumsiness, had other plans. As he got up to leave, his foot caught on the strap of his bag. He stumbled, knocking over Josie's drink, a glowing, violet liquid that shimmered like molten stars. It spilled across her notebook, the ink bleeding into swirls of color. "Crap! I'm so sorry," Milan blurted, scrambling to grab napkins. Josie waved him off, her bioluminescent skin flashing orange, a sign of annoyance, but quickly shifted back to a calmer hue. "It's fine," she said, though her voice carried a resigned tone. "This happens more often than you'd think." With humans? Milan asked sheepishly. With you, she deadpanned, her lips twitching into a sly smile. He laughed, the tension easing. I guess I owe you another drink. You owe me more than that, Josie replied, standing and offering her hand. But I'll settle for your company. 6 months later, Milan's life had transformed. What had once been a predictable routine of coding marathons and late-night gaming sessions had become an adventure-filled whirlwind. Josie had introduced him to alien markets, virtual exhibits of Zarellian art, and the occasional foray into the more bizarre corners of Andera Prime. For her part, Josie had picked up human quirks, delighting in Earth slang and even dabbling in cooking, though she remained adamant that pineapple on pizza was a crime against logic. Despite her wit and confidence, Milan had noticed her acting strange recently. Her glowing skin flickered with restless patterns, and her humor felt strained. Then, one evening, she showed up at his door. "Milan," she said, her voice unusually serious. "We need to talk." Milan frowned. Sure. Is everything okay?" She stepped inside, her movements uncharacteristically stiff. Glancing around his cluttered living room, her gaze landed on the floating habitat of Sprocket, a bioluminescent jellyfish-like pet she'd given him. "Sprocket's thriving," Milan offered, trying to lighten the mood. Josie barely smiled. "Milan," she hesitated, her skin shifting to lavender, a color he now recognized as nervousness. "My family wants us to get married." Milan froze. "Married? What?" She sighed. "In my culture, prolonged companionship between a male and female, especially involving shared meals and emotional exchanges, is viewed as courtship. My family assumes our relationship has progressed to the point of formalization." Milan stared. "We're not even dating." "Not by human standards," Josie said, exasperated. "But by Zarellian customs, we're essentially courting with intent to unite." Milan sank onto the couch. This escalated quickly. Josie folded her arms, her glowing skin dimming slightly. "Tell me about it." Eric stared at Josie, his thoughts racing. The silence between them stretched, broken only by the faint, rhythmic hum of Sprocket floating in its habitat. Finally, he managed to speak. "Okay, so your family thinks we're a couple, and if we don't play along, it'll cause problems for you back home?" Josie nodded, her bioluminescent skin flickering with faint streaks of yellow, a mix of frustration and unease. "Yes. If I don't offer a valid reason for delaying or rejecting the formalization, it'll reflect poorly on me. They'll assume there's something wrong with me, or worse, that I'm hiding something." Milan rubbed his temples, feeling a headache brewing. "Why not just tell them the truth? That we're friends, not—" He gestured vaguely between the two of them. "Whatever this is?" Josie let out a sharp exhale, her glowing skin dimming to a muted lavender. "Because in Zarellian culture, prolonged companionship like ours doesn't exist without romantic intent. Friendship between unattached adults of opposite genders isn't a concept they recognize. If I tell them we're just friends, they'll think I'm lying, or that you've rejected me and I'm too ashamed to admit it." Milan leaned back on the couch, staring at the ceiling. "Great. So, no matter what we do, someone's upset." Josie hesitated, then sat down beside him. Her glowing skin shifted to a soft blue, the calm, steady color Milan had come to associate with her at ease. "There might be a way to buy time, but you're not going to like it." Milan shot her a wary look. "Why does that sound ominous?" She ignored the question, instead clasping her hands in her lap. "If we go through the preliminary steps of the formalization, just the initial introductions and ceremonies, it'll satisfy my family for now. It doesn't have to mean anything. It's ceremonial." "Ceremonial?" Milan repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Josie, that sounds suspiciously like a fake engagement." "It's not fake by their standards," Josie said defensively. "It's just temporary. Think of it like stalling. Once the formalities are done, we can claim we need more time to develop the bond. That'll give me the space to manage my family's expectations without damaging my standing or dragging you into any further complications." Milan blinked at her. "You're asking me to pretend to be your fiancé?" She winced at the word. "Only for a little while. Just until the pressure eases." He stared at her, dumbfounded. Of all the bizarre scenarios he'd imagined since meeting Josie, accidentally offending alien diplomats, getting stranded in a zero-gravity bar, this one hadn't even been on the radar. "You're serious about this? Do I look like I'm joking?" she asked, her glowing skin now a tense shade of violet. Milan groaned, running a hand through his hair. "Josie, I can barely keep my plants alive. You really think I can pull off an intergalactic courtship?" Her expression softened, and she placed a hand on his arm. Her touch was cool, almost soothing, like the first breeze after a summer storm. "You don't have to do much. Just be yourself. My family already thinks highly of you, thanks to my colorful descriptions." Milan's eyes narrowed. "Colorful descriptions? What did you tell them?" Josie hesitated, her skin flickering yellow again. "I may have emphasized your intelligence, and your kindness, and your ability to navigate Earth's bafflingly chaotic society with remarkable adaptability." He snorted. "That's the most flattering way anyone's ever described my caffeine-fueled attempts to avoid responsibility." "It worked," Josie said, her voice earnest. "To them, you're an exceptional match." Milan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "And if I say no?" Josie's expression turned serious. "If you refuse, I'll have to face the consequences on my own. It could mean the end of my anthropological research here. My family might demand I return home to reflect on my failures." Milan sighed. He wasn't great with relationships, romantic or otherwise, but he wasn't heartless. He'd seen how much Josie loved exploring Earth, her excitement whenever she uncovered some new quirk of human culture. The thought of her losing that made his chest tighten uncomfortably. "Fine," he said finally. "I'll do it, but only because I don't want you getting shipped off to wherever it is you're from." Josie's glowing skin shifted back to soft blue, and her lips curved into a relieved smile. "Thank you, Milan. I promise this won't be as bad as you think." He raised an eyebrow. "You're not the one pretending to be engaged to an alien in front of her family." "True," Josie admitted, her smile turning sly. "But in fairness, you're the one who spilled my drink and set this whole thing in motion." Milan groaned. "You're never letting that go, are you?" "Not a chance." Milan stood awkwardly in front of a sleek, holographic screen that projected a glowing blue circle. This was Josie's family's communication hub, a sort of high-tech conference call, but with a lot more pressure. Josie had spent the past hour coaching him on Zarelian etiquette, drilling phrases into his brain that already felt like they were leaking out. "Remember," Josie said, adjusting his posture for the third time, "keep your tone respectful but firm. Don't bow too low. It's considered a sign of desperation. And whatever you do, don't mention anything about bodily fluids. They'll think you're being vulgar." Milan frowned. "Why would I even mention that?" "You'd be surprised," she muttered. Before he could ask for clarification, the glowing circle pulsed, and 3 figures appeared in the projection. They were tall, elegant like Josie, but their bioluminescent skin was more muted, their postures regal and imposing. "Milan Miles," the tallest one said, his glowing blue eyes narrowing slightly. "We have heard much about you." Milan swallowed hard and offered what he hoped was a respectful nod. It's an honor to meet you." The Zarelians exchanged unreadable glances, their skin glowing faintly. Josie stepped forward, her tone confident. "Esteemed family, this is the human I've chosen to partner with. I trust he meets your expectations." Milan felt his stomach drop. Chosen? Partner? Josie had warned him this would be intense, but she hadn't mentioned she'd be dropping words like that. The tallest Zarelian scrutinized him for what felt like an eternity. Finally, his skin shifted to pale silver, a color Milan hoped was approval. "His appearance is adequate," the figure said. Thanks?" Milan replied, unsure if that was a compliment or an insult. Josie shot him a warning look, and he quickly pressed his lips shut. This was going to be a long engagement. Milan leaned against the counter in Josie's apartment, his nerves still jangling from the virtual meeting with her family. He clutched a steaming cup of tea, some herbal concoction Josie swore was calming. If it was, he wasn't feeling it. "They said I was adequate," Milan muttered, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Is that a good thing? Or is it like when someone says, "Oh, that's interesting," and you know they hate it? Josie, sitting cross-legged on her sofa, glanced up from her holographic tablet. Her skin shimmered faintly silver, signaling amusement. In Zarellian terms, adequate is high praise. It means you've met their initial expectations. A very rare occurrence for an off-worlder. Well, hooray for me, Milan said, his sarcasm sharper than usual. What happens next? Do they email me a fiancé handbook or something? Josie's expression turned thoughtful, her skin flickering lavender as she set her tablet aside. Next, they'll begin preparations for the formal introduction ceremony. It'll be held on Earth, so it shouldn't disrupt your routine too much. Milan stared at her. Define too much. It's a simple gathering, she said, waving a hand dismissively. A few symbolic gestures, some shared meals, an exchange of tokens. Nothing too strenuous. Tokens? Milan asked, narrowing his eyes. What kind of tokens? Please tell me it's not some kind of blood pact. Josie rolled her eyes. Nothing that dramatic. It's usually a small, personal item, something that represents your commitment to the partnership. Milan blinked. Commitment? Josie, this is pretend. What am I supposed to give them? My Netflix password? She laughed, her glow shifting to a warm blue. You'll figure something out. Just pick something that shows you're serious, or at least something they'll believe is meaningful. Milan groaned and rubbed his face. This keeps getting more complicated. I'm not sure I'm cut out for this alien diplomacy stuff. Josie's smile softened, and she stood, crossing the room to stand beside him. Her cool hand rested lightly on his shoulder. You're doing better than you think, Milan. My family is difficult to impress. And yet, you've managed it. He glanced at her, caught off guard by the sincerity in her tone. Yeah, well, I'm just trying not to embarrass you or myself. Her gaze lingered on him for a moment, her glowing eyes unreadable. Then she stepped back, her skin flickering briefly to lavender before settling into a calm blue. I need to prepare some things for the ceremony, she said, her voice more businesslike now. It's best if we coordinate our stories beforehand. They may ask about how we met or our relationship. Milan nodded, though the thought of crafting a fake love story with an alien was not exactly on his bucket list. Okay, sure. Where do we start? Josie tilted her head, considering. We'll keep it simple. The less elaborate the story, the less likely we are to trip over details. Let's say we met at the cafe, the Comet's Trail. It's believable, and it's where we actually first spoke. Right? Milan said. And what about the relationship part? Do we have to, act like we're into each other? Josie's skin shimmered faintly yellow at the question, though she quickly masked it. It would help. Affection doesn't have to be overt, but subtle gestures, small touches, shared glances. Those will go a long way in convincing them. Milan swallowed hard. The thought of pretending to be romantically involved with Josie was strange. It wasn't that she wasn't attractive. She absolutely was, in an otherworldly, glowing-skinned kind of way. But this wasn't real. Was it? All right, he said, pushing the thought aside. But if I accidentally screw this up and your family declares me unworthy, I reserve the right to blame Sprocket. At the mention of his pet space jelly, Sprocket pulsed indignantly from its habitat, its glow brightening in protest. Josie chuckled, her silver teeth glinting as she shook her head. Deal. But don't underestimate them, Milan. They'll be watching us closely. Milan adjusted the collar of his jacket for what felt like the 100th time. He stood in the center of the garden Josie had rented for the occasion, surrounded by vibrant, bioluminescent plants that had been specially imported from her homeworld. The air shimmered faintly with holographic projections, patterns of glowing waves and swirling stars that gave the space an ethereal quality. You clean up well, Josie said, stepping up beside him. She wore a flowing, iridescent robe that seemed to ripple with light every time she moved. Her usual teasing smirk was absent, replaced by a rare look of calm. Thanks, Milan said, pulling at the sleeves of his jacket. But you're definitely stealing the show. Her skin glowed faintly blue at the compliment, and she tilted her head. Remember, confidence is key. Just follow my lead, and we'll get through this. Before Milan could reply, a soft chime echoed through the garden, signaling the arrival of her family. The three Zarelians from the hologram materialized at the far end of the garden, their glowing forms elegant and imposing. They glided forward with a grace that made Milan feel like a clumsy toddler by comparison. "Milan Miles," the tallest one said, his voice smooth but commanding. "We are pleased to meet you in person." Milan gave a slight bow, trying to remember Josie's advice. "The honor is mine." The Zarelians exchanged approving glances, their skin glowing faintly silver. Josie stepped forward, her tone warm but formal. "Esteemed family, I am pleased to present my chosen partner. Together, we seek to honor both our worlds and strengthen the bonds between them." Milan resisted the urge to glance at her, focusing instead on not looking like an idiot. The ceremony unfolded in a blur of symbolic gestures, pouring glowing liquids into a shared vessel, tracing intricate patterns in the air with their hands. Milan did his best to mimic Josie's movements, hoping he didn't look too ridiculous. Finally, the time came for the exchange of tokens. Josie presented her token first, a delicate pendant made of shimmering crystal, shaped like a star. Milan's heart raced as he reached into his pocket, pulling out the item he'd chosen, a simple keychain with a tiny rocket ship charm. It wasn't much, but it was something personal, something he'd had since he was a kid. "This represents the adventures we've had," he said, his voice steady despite his nerves. "And the ones still to come." For a moment, the garden was silent. Then, the tallest Zarelian nodded, his glowing skin shifting to a warm silver. "You are adequate," he said again, but this time, Milan thought he detected a hint of genuine approval. As the ceremony concluded and the family began their formal goodbyes, Josie turned to him, her expression unreadable. "You did well," she said softly. Milan managed a small smile. "Yeah, but I don't think I'll ever live down being called adequate." Josie's laugh was soft, almost musical. "In time, you might even wear it as a badge of honor." Milan chuckled, but as he looked at her glowing eyes, he couldn't shake the feeling that this whole charade might be leading him somewhere he hadn't expected. And for the first time, he wasn't sure if that scared him or excited him. "Would you like me to continue with the aftermath of the ceremony, or focus on the growing tension between them?" The garden ceremony had gone smoother than Milan expected, though he still couldn't quite believe the ridiculousness of it all. Adequate. They called him adequate. In Josie's culture, that apparently meant something positive, but it still stung a little. As they left the venue and stepped out into the bustling streets of Novo Arbor, Milan glanced at Josie. She looked radiant, her robe catching the glow of neon lights above them. He felt a strange mix of pride and unease. This wasn't real, he reminded himself. It was all an elaborate performance. "So," Milan said, breaking the silence, "I didn't completely embarrass myself back there, right?" Josie gave him a sidelong glance, her skin flickering with faint gold amusement. "Not at all. My family was impressed. And trust me, that's no small feat." "Impressed?" "They called me adequate," Milan said, shaking his head. "If that's a compliment, I'd hate to see what they say when they don't like someone." Josie laughed, the sound soft and musical. "They'd simply ignore you. The fact that they acknowledged you means you've already earned their respect." "Respect," Milan muttered. "Good to know I'm halfway to being their favorite human." As they walked, Josie's skin shifted to a faint lavender, a color Milan now recognized as thoughtful. She looked up at the glowing skyline of the city. "You handled the token exchange well. That keychain, it felt sincere." Milan hesitated. He hadn't told her how much that little rocket ship meant to him. It had been his lucky charm as a kid, a symbol of his dream to explore the stars someday. Giving it up, even as part of the charade, had felt like handing over a piece of himself. "I guess I figured it needed to mean something," he said, keeping his tone light. Josie nodded but didn't press further. They reached the entrance to Milan's apartment building, the faint hum of alien transport drones buzzing in the air above them. He turned to Josie, unsure what to say now that the ceremony was over. "So, what now?" he asked. Josie hesitated, her skin flickering briefly to lavender again. "Now, my family will observe us for the next few weeks. They'll expect to see us spending time together, Acting as a bonded pair? Acting, Milan repeated, raising an eyebrow. You mean more fake dates? She smiled, her silver teeth glinting. Exactly. Except this time, we need to make it convincing enough for my family to stop watching so closely. Milan sighed, running a hand through his hair. Okay, sure. I'll clear my schedule for the next few weeks. Just let me know when we're supposed to be bonding. Josie tilted her head, studying him. You've been a good sport about all this, Milan. I know it's not easy. Easy. Milan laughed. Josie, I'm a human pretending to be romantically involved with a glowing alien woman while her family analyzes my every move. I don't think the word easy applies here. Her skin flickered gold again, and she gave him a rare, genuine smile. Fair enough, but you're handling it better than most humans would. Great, he said with a mock bow. Add adequate under pressure to my resume. They stood there for a moment, the hum of the city around them. Josie's glow softened, and Milan found himself noticing the way her eyes reflected the light, like two tiny galaxies. Good night, Milan, she said finally, stepping back. Good night, Josie, he replied, watching as she turned and disappeared into the crowd. Milan's plans for a lazy morning were interrupted by a chime from his comm device. He groaned, rolling over on his couch, only to see Josie's name glowing on the screen. Hey, he answered, his voice groggy. What's up? Good morning, partner, Josie said, her voice teasing. Are you ready for our first official bonding outing? Milan sat up, rubbing his eyes. Wait, that's today? Yes, and I've already planned everything. Meet me at the intergalactic market in an hour. The market? Milan asked, frowning. Why there? Because, Josie said, her tone carrying a hint of mischief. It's the perfect place to be seen. Besides, I need to pick up a few things. Before he could argue, she ended the call, leaving him staring at the screen. The market was as chaotic as ever, a sprawling maze of stalls selling everything from glowing crystals to levitating cookware. Beings of all shapes and sizes bustled through the narrow aisles, their chatter a mix of languages that Milan couldn't begin to understand. He spotted Josie near a stall displaying shimmering fabrics. She waved him over, her skin glowing a cheerful gold. You're late, she said as he approached. Blame my human need for coffee, Milan replied, holding up a cup. She rolled her eyes but smiled. Come on, we got a lot to do. As they wandered through the market, Josie led him to various stalls, introducing him to vendors and making a point of holding his arm or standing close. Milan quickly realized this wasn't just about shopping. It was about creating a public display for anyone who might be watching. At one point, they stopped at a food stall selling Zarelian delicacies. Josie handed him a small, glowing fruit. Try this, she said, her tone challenging. Milan eyed it warily. Is it going to explode in my mouth? Josie laughed. Not unless you chew too hard. It's sweet, I promise. Taking a deep breath, Milan bit into the fruit. A burst of flavor, sweet, tangy, and slightly fizzy, exploded on his tongue. He blinked in surprise. Okay, that's actually really good, he admitted. Josie's eyes gleamed with amusement. See? You might just survive being my partner after all. As the day went on, Milan found himself relaxing. Despite the strange circumstances, he couldn't deny that spending time with Josie was fun. She had a way of making even the most mundane things feel exciting. But as they finished their tour of the market and started walking back, Josie's glow shifted to lavender again. What's wrong? Milan asked, noticing the change. She hesitated, her gaze fixed ahead. I've been thinking about what happens after this. Once my family is satisfied and we no longer have to pretend, Milan frowned. Yeah? What about it? Josie looked at him, her eyes searching his face. What if it doesn't feel like pretending anymore? Her words hit him like a freight train, and for a moment he couldn't speak. The sounds of the market seemed to fade into the background as he stared at her, trying to process what she'd just said. Josie, Before he could finish, her comm device chimed, breaking the moment. She glanced at it, her skin flickering with irritation. I have to go, she said quickly, turning away. Josie, wait. But she was already gone, disappearing into the crowd. Milan stood there, his heart racing. Pretending was one thing, But if Josie was starting to feel something real, he wasn't sure if he was ready for that. Milan spent the next few days in a fog of confusion, his mind constantly circling back to Josie's words. What if it doesn't feel like pretending anymore? Her voice echoed in his head, mixing with his own doubts and the growing discomfort in his chest. He hadn't signed up for anything serious, had he? This was just a temporary arrangement, a cultural exchange disguised as a fake relationship. But the more he thought about it, the more everything felt real. Josie's smile, her warmth, the little jokes they shared. He could almost convince himself they weren't just for show. That afternoon, he found himself back at the Comet's Tail, trying to drown out his thoughts with another cup of Strix and brew. He needed a break from the ever-growing tension, both the one between him and Josie, and the one building inside his own mind. Just as he took a sip, the door opened, and there she was, Josie. Her silver hair glinted in the artificial light, and her glow was muted, a faint gold this time. She looked almost hesitant. Milan set down his cup, his heart skipping a beat. Josie? Her gaze flickered briefly to the floor before meeting his eyes. She walked over and sat down at the table with him, a heavy silence hanging between them. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. "Yeah," Milan replied, trying to steady his breathing. "Of course." He gestured to the empty chair across from him. "What's up?" Josie didn't immediately respond, her skin shimmering faintly with uncertainty. She seemed to be gathering her thoughts, her usual confident demeanor faltering. "I've been thinking a lot," she began slowly. "About us. About everything." She paused, as if choosing her words carefully. "Milan, this whole situation was never supposed to be this complicated." Milan chuckled softly, though the sound was hollow. "Yeah, I think I've figured that out." Complicated is an understatement at this point. Josie's lips twitched into a small smile, but the unease in her eyes didn't fade. "I didn't expect you to become important to me. I didn't expect to," she faltered again, her skin flickering between shades of lavender and blue. "To care this much?" Milan's stomach tightened. "Josie." "No," she interrupted quickly, her voice gaining a touch of urgency. "I need to say this. I thought we were just pretending. But now, it's not just that anymore, and She stopped herself, taking a deep breath, and for a moment, Milan could see the vulnerability in her eyes. "I don't know how to make it stop." His mind raced, trying to catch up. The last few months, all the moments they shared, had been real for her too. He could see it in her eyes, in the way she cared, in the way she looked at him. "Josie," he said, his voice quieter now, I don't know what to say. This whole thing was never supposed to be serious, right? We were just supposed to play along until your family got bored of us. And then we go back to our lives." His voice faltered, a bitter edge creeping in. "But I've been feeling the same thing. It's not pretend anymore, and I don't know what that means." She looked at him, her glow shifting to an almost ethereal shade of silver. "I'm scared, Milan. If we tell my family that this was a mistake, that we were never serious, it could destroy everything for me. My status here, my career, it's all connected. And if we break their expectations, I risk losing everything." Milan swallowed hard, the weight of her words settling over him like a heavy blanket. He had never fully understood the stakes, not really. He had thought it was just some weird misunderstanding between two cultures. But now, he saw it was so much more than that. "And what if I want to do this for real?" Milan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. What if I don't want to be just adequate anymore?" Josie's eyes widened, her skin flickering in 1,000 colors as if she were processing the words. Slowly, her hand reached out across the table, her fingers brushing lightly against his. The touch was warm, and for a moment, the hum of the cafe and the bustling city outside felt distant, irrelevant. "I want this, Milan," she said softly. "I want to be with you. I want to make this work, but I don't know how to fix it." Milan's heart raced, and for a brief, dizzying second, he considered the consequences. He thought about his life on Earth, the humans he'd known, his comfortable routines. But none of it seemed to matter when he looked at Josie. "I don't know how either," he said, "but I think we'll figure it out. Together." Josie's skin glowed brighter, a wave of relief sweeping over her. She squeezed his hand gently. You're willing to take this risk? With me? I don't know if I'm willing. I know I am, Milan answered, a small, almost shy smile tugging at his lips. I've already been through weirder things with you than I thought was even possible. How bad could it get? Josie laughed, a melodic sound that made his heart flutter. I'm glad you're on board. Yeah, Milan said, feeling a sense of calm settling over him. Let's take this one step at a time. Together. For the first time in months, Milan felt like the weight on his shoulders had lifted. He wasn't just some pawn in a galactic game anymore. He was something more. And as the hours slipped by in the cafe, surrounded by alien voices and the soft hum of technology, Milan realized that whatever came next, whether it was marriage, an unexpected twist, or a lifetime of navigating two very different worlds, he would face it with Josie by his side. Epilogue. 6 months later, Milan stood next to Josie at the edge of the spaceport, watching a sleek interstellar ship prepare for takeoff. He had never imagined he would be here, about to board a vessel bound for a distant planet he could barely pronounce the name of. But here he was. Josie stood beside him, her hand resting in his, her skin glowing like the stars themselves. They had made it through the cultural confusion, the misunderstandings, and the expectations. They had made it because they had made a choice. Together. You ready for this? Milan asked, his voice low. Josie smiled, her eyes sparkling with excitement. I think I'm more than ready, human. And this time, we're not pretending. Milan grinned, a surge of warmth filling his chest. Guess we'll see how adequate I am on your planet, huh? She laughed, her voice like a soft breeze. You'll do just fine. And with that, they boarded the ship, their future uncertain but full of possibility, as the universe stretched out before them, vast and full of unexplored wonders. Whatever came next, they would face it together, no longer pretending,